There was a time when I believed true love only happened once, and if you let it slip away, the rest of your life would just be an exercise in acceptance. My name is Margaret. I'm 72 years old, and for a long time, I thought I had buried my great love amidst the good intentions of youth and the obligations of adulthood. But Thomas never completely vanished. He lived in a quiet corner of my memory, like an old song that plays when you least expect it. We met in 1971, when everything felt urgent and possible. He wore his hair a bit longer than he should, spoke softly, and listened with an intensity that unraveled me. We were always laughing. Even when things got tough, even when the future left us groundless, he made me feel like the world could be smaller than us, and together we'd manage. We made too many plans, as if time were just a minor detail in our favor. But life had other plans. He was accepted into a program in another city across the country, and I had to stay to care for my mother, who was starting to forget names, including mine. We promised everything, to write, to visit, to keep going. But distance, longing, and pride make a deadly combination. The letters dwindled, the phone calls turned into awkward silences. And before I knew it, he had become an unturned page in my story. I married a few years later to a good man, Richard, stable, loyal, who never asked for more than I could give. We built a decent life, had children, grandchildren, memories. But there were nights when, even surrounded by all this, I caught myself thinking about what I hadn't lived. Not out of regret, but because of a kind of absence I never found a place for. I carried Thomas's name like someone holding a key they no longer know where it belongs. And then, after so much time, so many cycles, so many forgotten birthdays, he came back. Or rather, the world found a way to put him in my path again. As if it wanted to ask, even after everything, what if it's still love? It was by chance, or what life pretends is chance, when in truth, it's just destiny with patience. One ordinary afternoon, I was checking my emails between recipes when I saw his name on the screen. A social media invite, simple as that. Thomas M., as if 50 years could be reduced to an abbreviation. My heart faltered as if I were 20 again. I opened his profile slowly, like peering through the window of a house I swore was demolished. There he was, white hair, serene expression, the same eyes, now more tired but still steady, as if they'd been waiting for this exact moment. There were photos with grandchildren, travel landscapes, a smile more restrained than I remembered, but with the same subtle curve at the corner of his mouth. And there was a message. 3 lines. Margaret, I don't know if you'll remember me, but if you do, write me. I laughed. I cried. I trembled. And after all this time, I replied. We spoke at first with caution, like handling an old piece of art, afraid it might break. Short exchanges, superficial updates. He told me he was widowed too, lived in a city not too far away, retired 5 years ago, but still taught history to kids who think the 70s are fiction. I told him about my life, my grandchildren, my plants, my silences. We talked about books, music, aging, and, with an unexpected lightness, about all the things we'd left unsaid. The truth is, no well-lived life erases what was left unfinished, and our conversation, despite all the decades in between, felt like an intact bridge, just covered in the dust of time. After a few weeks, he asked if we could meet, and I, without consulting fear, said yes. We met at a modest cafe near where it all began. I recognized him before he saw me. He walked more slowly, slightly stooped, but there was something in his gestures that remained identical. When our eyes met, it was as if none of the years had passed. We hugged carefully, not for lack of desire, but because certain reunions demand silence before words. We sat. He held my hand for a few seconds and said only, "You still have the same eyes." And I understood right there, without needing anything else, that something had endured. Something that neither time, nor distance, nor separate paths could erase. We sat in that cafe for nearly 3 hours, barely noticing. Time, which had devoured us for 50 years, now seemed to want to give back every stolen minute. We talked without hurry, like two old friends who never stopped listening to each other. He told me about his marriage that didn't work out in the end, about his wife's cancer, about the pain of watching her go, and about the quiet guilt he felt for, on certain days, thinking of me. I told him about Richard, about the good years, about the tough final times, about the loneliness that settled slowly like moss on forgotten walls. At some point, we stopped talking about the past and started talking about the present. He asked how I liked my coffee now. I wanted to know if he still listened to Simon and Garfunkel when it rained. Our memories were crutches for the present, not for nostalgia, but for this strange feeling of reconnecting with the truest part of who we were. When we parted, he held my coat before I walked through the door. No kiss, no promise. Just a long look and the question that pierced me through. "Can I see you again?" I answered without hesitation. "Please." And I left with wet eyes and a light heart, as if an entire life had finally taken a step in the right direction. I knew I wasn't a young woman ready to lose herself in illusions anymore. I was a woman with wrinkles, scars, stories, but also with space. And in that space, after everything, there was still room for love. In the days that followed, something in me awoke with a sweetness I no longer expected to feel. It wasn't euphoria nor the impatient rush of youth. It was different, calmer, deeper, as if my body, my memories, and my silence had aligned to whisper, "You're still alive, wholly." We met again, this time in a park, then at a small city festival, then just to walk. We didn't talk about going back. We didn't use the word love, but everything, there was already a confession. The lingering looks, the way he laughed softly just for me, the way my hands found his without warning, it was all new and at the same time ancient. He started calling me in the middle of the afternoon just to ask if I was okay. Sometimes I'd say yes, and he'd just reply good before hanging up. And still, I smiled like a girl. In one of those meetings, he brought me a flower from his garden wrapped in plain paper. It was a white camellia. He said it reminded him of the day I put a flower like it in my hair over 50 years ago. I didn't even remember. He did. That undid me, because time teaches us to forget what doesn't matter. But he, with that simple gesture, proved that some memories stay. Not because we cling to them, but because they never wanted to leave. Our children reacted with surprise, some with caution, others with suspicion disguised as concern. The truth is, the world likes to see old people quiet, accepting silence as the end. Love, for many, is the territory of youth, as if hearts had an expiration date. There were too many questions. Are you sure? Isn't it too soon? What if he's just a beautiful memory? I listened patiently, but my body, my eyes, my soul already knew. This wasn't a memory. It was presence. It was real. And on an ordinary night, after a simple dinner, he held my face with both hands, looked at me for a long time, and said, "You know, Maggie, I thought I'd forgotten what it felt like to feel this, but now I know. It's still love." And I just rested my forehead against his, because there was nothing more to say. Yes, it was still love. From that moment, everything between us took on a new tone, but not an urgent one. Neither of us wanted to rush, because we knew, with the calm of those who've lost and started over, that love doesn't need haste when it's right. We started sharing small rituals. He'd pick me up every Wednesday with a hot coffee in hand. I'd make soup on Sundays and wait for him with the radio playing old songs. Sometimes we wandered the city streets aimlessly, like two ghosts of the past rediscovering color in everything. Other times, we just sat in silence, watching the sunset through the window, as if eternity, which we'd never touched before, was right there. But even with everything flowing so naturally, there was a care in us that didn't exist when we were young. No more games, no pride, no unanswered questions. There was fear, yes, a different kind. Fear of not having enough time. Fear that our bodies wouldn't keep up with what our hearts still wanted to give. And above all, fear that the world, with its haste and judgments, would snatch away this newfound peace. One afternoon, after a routine checkup, Thomas told me he'd been forgetting some words. Small things, the name of a flower, the day of the week. He laughed, trying to lighten the confession. But I saw in his eyes what he didn't say. He was afraid of forgetting me, and that tore me apart. Not because I feared losing him, but because I knew that if it happened, I'd have to be the one to stay whole for both of us. I hugged him right there, in the middle of the kitchen, with the smell of freshly baked bread still in the air. And I whispered, "If you ever forget me, I'll remind you. And if you can't remember anymore, I love you just the same." He cried. So did I. And in that embrace, which lasted longer than any promise we made in the past, I knew the love that had withstood time was now proving itself in the present, and it was stronger than ever. The months that followed were a bittersweet blend of presence and tenderness. Not every day was light. There were moments when Thomas got lost mid-sentence, stared at the horizon searching for a word that slipped away, or asked my grandson's name as if it were the first time. But there were also other moments, many, infinite, when he looked at me with such love, such clarity, that everything else vanished. He might forget where he put his glasses or what day it was. But he never forgot to hold my hand. He never forgot my favorite tea. He never forgot to say, as he left, "See you tomorrow, my Maggie." One of those quiet mornings, he took me to the place we used to go when we were two bold young people, inventing a future that never happened. It was a clearing by the lake, hidden behind a trail almost no one knew anymore. The landscape had changed, of course, but there was something there, maybe the sound of the water, maybe the memory of our first kiss, that still belonged to us. We sat on a weathered wooden bench, and he looked at me with an expression that knew this moment needed to be kept beyond memory. "If this is the last time we're here, I want you to remember that I waited for you. Even without knowing I was waiting." I held his face in my hands and replied, "You didn't wait for me. You never left me." And in that moment, with white hair touched by the breeze and eyes misty with what we couldn't say, I realized it didn't matter how. Many years had passed. It didn't matter that our bodies no longer had the strength of before, that our memories sometimes got jumbled, because it was still love, a whole love, a mature love, a love that wasn't born to impress, but to endure. And even if the world forgot, even if time erased our names from calendars, photos, stories, we both would know. Love prevailed. Life after that took on a different rhythm. Slower, yes, but more alive too. It was as if every small gesture had gained new meaning. Sharing a cup of coffee with him, watching an old movie for the 5th time, commenting on the weather, listening to his breathing as he napped beside me on the couch. Everything felt preciously simple. We didn't make plans for next year, didn't talk about 10 years from now. We talked about tomorrow, and sometimes just about today. It was enough. It was whole. We started calling ourselves us, without noticing. Want us to stop by the market tomorrow. I think we like this bread better. Small phrases, but heavy with belonging. And in that us, I rediscovered a part of myself that had been suspended for decades, waiting for someone who knew how to love me in the right rhythm. Thomas was that someone. He didn't try to take me back to youth. He loved me as I was now, with my wrinkled hands, my predictable routine, my back pain, and my habit of correcting word pronunciations. One morning, he showed up with a small wooden box. Inside was an old ring, worn, simple. He placed it on the table, looked into my eyes and said, "I don't want to marry you. I want to keep choosing you every day. This is just so you'll remember. When I forget," I cried softly, and said I'd accept being remembered by him, even if only for moments, even if only in gestures, even if only in the touch of hands. Life can seem unfair, bringing love back when the countdown nears its end. But now I understand it's not unfairness. It's generosity. It's redemption. Love doesn't need to come at the start of life to be true. Sometimes it comes when the soul is mature enough to understand that it doesn't need the future, just the now. There was a morning when he forgot my name. It was subtle, delicate, but it hurt. He called me dear, as he always did, but avoided saying more. It was as if he knew something had faded inside, and still, he wanted to spare me the pain of noticing. I smiled, kissed his forehead, and made coffee as usual. I didn't cry there. I waited until he dozed off in the living room armchair to let the tears fall silently. But even in that forgetting there was love, because even without remembering who I was, he treated me as if he knew I was everything. In the days that followed, the forgetfulness grew. Small lapses, mixed up dates, stories told out of order, and slowly I understood that his memory was like an album with pages starting to come loose. But the love stayed intact between us. It no longer lived in words. It lived in gestures, in the way he looked at me when I entered the room, in the way he held my hand tightly when a stranger approached, in the touch on my shoulder, in the calm he only had when I was near. One late afternoon, we were sitting side by side, watching the sky change colors, when he suddenly held my hand more firmly. He looked at me with those confused but serene eyes and asked, "Where do we know each other from?" I took a deep breath, smiled tenderly, and replied, "From time. We know each other from time." He smiled back. "Oh, that's why my heart recognizes you." And in that moment it no longer mattered what he could remember, because true love, the kind that survives everything, doesn't live only in memory. It lives in the body, in the gaze, in the soul, and his soul still knew exactly who I was. In the end, love grew even quieter, and perhaps because of that, even stronger. Thomas no longer remembered names, nor stories, nor old promises. Sometimes he woke up calling for someone from the past, mixed up days, forgot the way back from the living room to the bedroom. But whenever he saw me, his face softened. He couldn't say my name, but he smiled and held my hand firmly and offered me the last cookie on the plate, even without knowing who I was. Because deep inside, some part of him still knew. People looked at us with a mix of tenderness and pity. Some said, "It's beautiful but sad." I never agreed with that, because there was no sadness in staying by the side of someone who loved me until his last trace of lucidity. There was beauty, there was courage, there was truth. We both knew, even without words, that love had prevailed, not because it lasted forever perfectly, but because it survived memory, youth, losses, and the relentless passage of time. On the last morning we spent together, he no longer spoke. He breathed with difficulty, but held my hand as if it were the anchor still keeping him between worlds. I whispered small things, a memory, a song, a piece of us. And in a moment of silence, almost like a breath, he squeezed my hand one last time. There was no final word, no declaration, just presence, and it was enough. Today I live with longing, but not with emptiness, because I was truly loved by a man who came back after 50 years and chose to love me at the right time. Not the perfect time, but the possible time. And I loved him back every day, even when he didn't remember, even when he could no longer say. If anyone asks me if it was still love, I answer without hesitation. It was. It always was. Until the end. Today, I sometimes sit on the porch with a cup of tea and let the silence speak for me. I don't need many memories to feel he's still near. Sometimes it's enough. The afternoon light filtering through the curtain, the smell of bread in the oven, or an old song playing softly on the radio. People think aging is the end of passion, that after a certain age, love becomes a memory, or lukewarm companionship. But that's not what I lived. With Thomas, love wasn't less intense. It was more present, more whole, more mature. He showed me that even when the body fails and memory slips away, the heart still knows exactly where to return. And I was that place. I was home. I was love. Love prevailed, not with flowers, nor eternal promises, nor movie scenes, but with constancy, with hands held until the end, with the simple and extraordinary act of staying,